Some dipstick, in their infinite wisdom, welded the nut to this shaft, effectively trapping the bushing on there forever. For you guys new to the channel, this is my $1,000 1975 Pontiac Firebird. Saw this thing under a cover. Owner did not know why it wouldn't run. So I decided to fly out, meet Vlad from Invincible Extremes and my buddy Matt, Imperial Beach Dad, who painted that spoiler you see and that awesome chicken on the hood. And we fixed it and drove it 2,000 miles across country. I'll throw a little card. You guys can go back and watch that too. Now, it came with all this awesome stuff that the guy never installed on the car. We got new shocks, ignition cylinder, front brakes, that's rotors and pads, front suspension, basically the coil springs, full poly kit, all the ball joints are in there as well, and SpongeBob, just for the hell of it. I love working on old cars. Can't make this up. Some dipstick, in their infinite wisdom, welded the nut to this shaft, effectively trapping the bushing on there forever. So I'm gonna try to die grind this thing, or I'm gonna have to buy a new shaft, maybe a new upper control arm. Guess we'll see. Basically what I'm going to try to do is hammer on the loose part of the control arm here. Oops, there we go. And the shaft, in theory, there's interference there. The shaft will end up pushing the bushing up and up and out of its hole. If the shaft doesn't do it, sitting on the edge of this vise will. There's also some pretty good videos on how to get these out with clamps and washers in a big old socket, which I do not have. So we're going to use this method because, well, it's what we have available. We want to use that shaft to suspend the thing, give us a little, there we go, just like that. Second side is being a little crankier, and I don't have a hydraulic press, which would be the ideal tool. So this is just a ball joint press I rented. You can get these from pretty much any store, and they're free if you take them back. I'm gonna throw that in the bench, or in the vise, just to stabilize it. Pretty much bottomed out. Yep. Tearing down the lower control arms now. This is pretty easy to get the ball joint out. All we have to do is select a die that fits all the way over the lower ball joint, and the stud just threads right through this lower die. There's a bigger hole in it, so we'll just tighten this thing down and the ball joint will pop up right into this empty space. Down to pushing out the lower control arm bushings. Something I've learned, these like to flex since these are just kind of pinched metal, and if these do change shape, it kind of eggs the hole and traps these in here. So just a couple of 1¼ inch bolts with a nut on the end. You can actually back these out to make them a little tighter, both pressing in and when you're pressing out to the old bushings. These are really handy, and they'll keep this thing from kind of twisting on you and making the whole job difficult. Another tip, if you're doing this with a ball joint press like I am, take your new bushings and get some structural washers at like a Fastenal or a farm store. You get these in a bunch of different sizes and shapes. So I just got these thick ones to press in and press out the bushings. In some cases, the kind of the size of your dies won't really work to press these through, so it gives you a little extra spacer in there. Control arm bushings on these go in basically the same way they came out. You just grease here and the other lip where it makes contact with the metal. Put those bolts on the back side to keep this thing from pinching under the pressure. And I just shoved one of those thick washers in here to distribute the pressure more evenly and protect that new bushing. Last step, installing the lower ball joints. Pretty easy. I just kind of drop in the way they came out, and I try to point the cotter pin so it won't go directly into the back of your spindles. Set it in there like that, and then again make sure that this sleeve or this die is not going to touch the outside of this as we're pushing it through. And if possible, fit a die in here that just presses on the edges of this ball joint. You don't want to press in the center and destroy it. Otherwise, most of these have pretty much the exact perfect surface to press on this thing, so you can just put it right on top. Make sure it lines up nicely with the outside of that and does not press in the middle. It'll squeeze right in. Alright, final step of assembly before we can actually put these things on the car. I had to order some new upper control arm shafts because the nut was welded on one and the other was just destroyed. So kind of important note, when these do go on the car, they are offset. You'll actually notice the shaft in the center is not perfectly in the middle. So these are actually designed to lay this way, which brings in your upper control arms another 1/8 inch or so. Just gives you a little bit more camber. It's designed really to help cornering. So it doesn't really matter as you install these, but do be mindful of that as you're bolting these up to the car, which direction you have them flipped. It does change your steering geometry. So kind of how we got these in, we pressed in the first bushing. The second one, we have to actually install the shaft in the middle first, same way it came apart. And these new shafts came with factory style bushings, which have a serrated end on them. And for the inside, up against the shaft, there are these little serrated washers. We don't need these since I'm using an energy suspension kit, but I actually did measure. So there's a dimpled surface on the inside here, and to the inside of the bushing is exactly 1.5 inches, same as here. So those are not necessary since the actual inner bushing is not serrated. It's really not going to benefit you at all. It would just not allow your bushings to press all the way in. So depending which way you go, make sure that you put these washers in if you're using factory style. So last step, pretty easy. We're going to grease the edge of this, same as we did with the others. And if you have a vise handy, you should be able to just open this thing up to allow the shaft through. And basically we can just pound on the top of this thing with a hammer. And that's pretty much it. Once those dimples touch the control arm, it's installed. I suppose this is as good a place as any to start the reinstall. I had to put new upper control arm shafts on here, and you'll notice they're actually set a little bit inboard of the center line, which is actually going to push this upper control arm closer to the block just a little bit and give you more camber for grip, basically is the intent of this. We are still going to put the shims back in the exact same order they came out, so the alignment will be pretty close, just a little bit more lean to the tires than they did when I took it apart. So in order to get this thing back in, I did pull out one of the bolts and took a plug wire loose down here, but this thing should just slip right back in. You don't have to remove your inner fenders to do this, but this one was already out. I figured kind of a nice way to kind of illustrate how these go in. Okay, after a little trial and error, I think I've got this spring compressor alignment pretty much dialed in. So the top, which is going to have this flatter end to the spring, you can see how it's kind of pounded or machined down. You want to put the hooks up as far as you can get them without pinching them in between the spring. Now the other end, or the bottom, is not flattened. You'll notice it has this kind of cut pigtail. That actually sits in an indentation on the inside here, closest to the motor. So What I figured out, as this thing compresses, the end that actually has the open end of the fork, it's going to compress a little more, which effectively bends your spring. So it gives you just a little bit more wiggle room. So probably about the best way you can get this thing installed, and it'll give you the most travel, so you won't have as much pressure and as much danger installing this thing on the car. All that's left to do is crank it on one more time and see if it fits. Not all the parts that came with this car are in perfect shape. This second rotor is pretty nasty on the backside, so I think what I'm going to do is just take this little sanding wheel to it. Hopefully not take off a whole bunch of material and just get all the bonded plastic and junk off of here. The front, I'm pretty confident I can just hit with like a dish scrubber and some brake clean and make sure that race is spotless and the front of this thing isn't too nasty. I mean, worst case I can have it turned, but who wants to spend money on that?